Welcome to the House of the Dragon. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. House of the Dragon is the name of my dragon deck. One of my very best decks, maybe my premier deck. The show you are on is called Muscles and Magic the Gathering. I'm Bobby Maximus. I am the muscles, and these cards, these are Magic the Gathering, something that's represented a huge passion in my life for the past 3 decades. But you are here to learn all about dragons, so we are going to get down to business. Now, I'm always going to tell you that this is my premier deck. This is my best deck. Whether this really is the star of my collection, and I have a massive Magic the Gathering collection, or it's one of my B decks, I'll call them B decks, I put the same kind of effort into them. I love them just the same, and I absolutely adore them. But this deck right here, this dragon deck comes in at a whopping $5,500. Let me repeat that, $5,500, and it is my Dragon deck. I've loved dragons since I was a little kid. My favorite two kindred or kinfolk type groups in Magic the Gathering are actually dragons and vampires. So I'm really excited to show this dragon deck off to you today. And we're right around the corner. I believe the release date is April the 11th, 2025 from Dragonstorm Tarkir, that new set from Magic the Gathering. I actually pulled it up on another website here. I was so excited to look at it. But this new Dragonstorm set is going to be unreal. There's a couple of cards I really, really want from it, mainly the Mox Jasper for my dragon deck. So with all that said, let's do a deep dive into this dragon deck. The commander is none other than the Dragon, the best dragon commander. There's some other dragon commanders you can use, and I'll talk about those a little bit, but this is my favorite. Now, why is this my favorite? It's not just playability, it's collectability. If you know anything about me, you know I am a collector. That's how I started in Magic the Gathering. At one point, I had over 40 complete sets, which have since been destroyed to fuel my commander obsession, but I collect. A 5-color deck allows me to display all of the dragons, and so that was the most important thing to me. But the Dragon also ultra competitive. The key feature with this card is it has eminence. Now, the Dragon has a massive casting cost, a lot bigger than I want for my commander, right? I often talk about the mana value of the deck, and the quicker or the lower the mana value, the quicker your deck gets rolling. I have this number that I put together. It's 200. For my decks to be competitive, they have to have a total mana value of under 200. Well, what's a mana value, you ask? It are all these symbols on the cards added together. Lands don't have a mana value. Lands are 0. But if you add this up, right, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 4. That's 9. Then we take our Planeswalker, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. That's 14 taken up on 2 cards alone. I play with 35 lands in my commander decks, which means I have 65 cards left over. This mana value is going to get out of control in a hurry. So I oftentimes like to keep the casting cost of my commander low, but that also allows me to get it out quicker. With the Dragon, it doesn't matter so much because it's got that eminence feature. Something we saw, if you go back to my vampire deck video, something we saw with Edgar Markov. But as long as this is in the command zone, I still get some kind of bonus. And the bonus, as long as the Dragon is in the command zone or on the battlefield, other dragon spells I cast cost 1 less to cast. So even if they're big, beefy creatures, I can get them out faster. When I do get the Dragon out, and at some point he will come out, whenever one or more dragons you control attack, draw that many cards, then you may put a permanent card from your hand onto the battlefield. What an incredible way to cheat big creatures onto the battlefield. So I love the Dragon. That is our commander today. Put him aside. 1 Planeswalker in the deck. Sarkhan Unbroken, super powerful. He has a 5 casting cost, which is a little higher than I would like, but it's a super useful card. It comes out with 4 loyalty counters. Immediately, I could draw a card, then add 1 color of any 1 mana of any color. That's why this is in this deck primarily as a mana fixer. It acts as a mana rock. For a -2, you can create a 4/4 red dragon creature token with flying. Super important because you can make that on turn 1 if you need to. And then the big one, the finisher, and this is a game ender. The final ultimate ability. Search your library for any number of dragon creature cards, then put them onto the battlefield and shuffle your library. There's a lot of dragons in this deck. I think I have 20 of them. This will end the game. That is my Planeswalker. Now we will move on to creatures. All right, and it's time for the dragons. And truth be told, I've actually got my deck list up here. You can find my deck list in the show notes. I feature all my decks with the exact printings of these cards because I actually own all of these cards. These aren't proxies, they aren't prints. These are actual, genuine, real Magic the Gathering cards. But on my Mox Field, I have the exact printing in my deck list if you want to check that out later so you don't have to take notes and stuff. But there were so many dragons I want to include. This was one of the harder decks that I've ever built for two reasons. A, keeping that mana value under 200, which is really hard with a 5-color deck, and especially with dragons when you've got big, beefy creatures. It's really hard to do with dragons, really hard to do with Leviathans, really hard to do with the Eldrazi. But the other reason this deck was hard to build, there were so many dragons I want to include. Actually, as part of this video later on, towards the end of the video, I'm going to show you some dragons that didn't make the cut that I desperately wanted to put in here. When this new set comes out, I am definitely going to build a secondary dragon deck. Right now, I've got over 50 commander decks. So you know I have a primary elf deck and a secondary elf deck. I've got a primary vampire deck, a secondary vampire deck. 2 minute to feature. The same with dragons. The first is the ancient copper dragon. These ancient dragons that came from Baldur's Gate, they're incredible. Some of the best dragons ever printed. This one here is key to this deck. Whenever the ancient copper dragon deals combat damage to a player, you roll a d20. You create a number of treasure tokens equal to the result. That helps me get all my dragons out. The ancient gold dragon, same kind of deal. When you attack and do combat damage, you roll a dice. This one, you create a number of 1/1 blue fairy dragon creatures. The ancient silver dragon, draw cards equal to the result after you roll a d20, and you have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. So super useful, especially because there's a couple of cards in this deck that allow me to cheat dragons out from my hand. Mana Fixing, or a Mana Dork, the Birds of Paradise, probably the greatest one ever. It's a 1-drop, and you can add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. I want to see this on turn 1. The Bloom Tender, another great one, a bit of a higher casting cost, but super usable. For each color among permanents you control, add 1 mana of that color. Great way to get dragons out. The Delighted Halfling. Now, you can tap it, you can add a colorless, or you can tap it and add 1 mana of any color, but you can only use it to cast a legendary spell, and it can't be countered. Lots of legendary dragons in this deck, so super usable card. Dragon Lord Dramoka, an Elder Dragon. The spell can't be countered. It's got flying and lifelink, and my opponents can't cast spells during your turn. A great way to shut people down. That was an auto include. That was not one of the dragons that I had a hard time deciding whether or not it made the cut. Dragon Master Outcast. If I control 6 or more lands at the beginning of my upkeep, I create a 5/5 dragon creature, fly and put it onto the battlefield. Dragon spells cost 2 less to play. Dragon Speaker Shaman, great way to get your dragons out earlier. And that combined with that Eminence feature from the Dragon helps me accelerate the game. The Dryad of the Elysian Grove. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. That helps a ton in a 5-color deck with big creatures. It allows me to accelerate quicker. And lands I control are every basic land type in addition to their other types. So kind of like a Chromatic Lantern, if you will. Essica, God of the Tree. Vigilance. You can add 1 mana of any color. Other legendary creatures I control have vigilance and add 1 mana of any color. And this is actually useful in this deck. It's one of those double-sided cards, but if I want, I can bring out the Prismatic Bridge. At the beginning of your upkeep, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature or planeswalker. Put that card on the battlefield and the rest on the bottom in any order. That really helps get the dragons out. So depending how the gameplay is going, I will decide to do one of those 2 things. The Goldspan Dragon, another great deck, and this works really well in tandem with the Ancient Copper Dragon. Whenever Goldspan Dragon attacks or becomes a target of a spell, create a treasure token, and treasure tokens, they change. Instead of getting 1 mana of any color, I get 2, so this can help be an accelerant. The Hellkite Courser. When Hellkite Courser enters the battlefield, you can put a commander you own from the command zone onto the battlefield. It gains haste. Return it to the command zone at the beginning of the next end step. Great way to get the Dragon out and generate some extra dragons. The Ignoble Hierarch, another mana dork. This is a great one. It adds black, red, or green. Miriam Sentinel Worm. I was talking about other dragon commanders. This could be another dragon commander. This is a great one. Whenever another non-token dragon enters the battlefield under your control, create a token that's a copy of it, except the token isn't legendary if that dragon is legendary. If I was looking to build an ultra competitive deck, I might use this over the Ur Dragon. The problem with me was collectability, right? Any dragon with white in it, any dragon with black in it, I can't use. So this did not become my commander. I chose the Ur Dragon, but this is probably what I will build my secondary dragon deck around. Minion of the Mighty, a lesser known card from Adventures in Forgotten Realms. It's got Pack Tactics. Whenever Minion of the Mighty attacks, if you attack with creatures with total power 6 or greater, you may put a dragon creature card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. It's also got Menace, which means you have to block it with 2 creatures. Nicol Bolas had to be included. You didn't see it in the Planeswalkers. That was a really, really hard cut for me. But a lot of the Nicol Bolas Planeswalkers have massive casting costs. So we included Nicol Bolas the Ravager, much lower casting cost. When Nicol Bolas the Ravager enters the battlefield, each opponent draws a card or discards a card, not draws. I don't want that. Discards a card. And then if I pay all this mana, I exile it and I come back transformed. All right. And here we go. It becomes a Planeswalker. The ultimate ability, I can draw 2 cards. The -3, not the ultimate ability. The ultimate ability is the last one. I'm so excited to go over this thing, and I don't even know what I'm saying. The first ability is draw 2 cards. I get a +2. The second ability is a -3. Nicol Bolas the Arisen deals 10 damage to target creature or planeswalker, so it will kill a lot of things on the board. Put target creature or planeswalker card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. That's the -4. That's a great ability, kind of like a reanimate. And -12, exile all but the bottom card of target player's library, kind of a game ender. So love that card. The Noble Hierarch, another mana dork. Really nice version of that card. Old Gnawbone. Adventures in Forgotten Realms was a really, really good set. I know a lot of people weren't overly high on it, counted it as like somewhat weak, but I got so many cards, so much use out of that set. It's one of my favorite ever. And I do love Dungeons and Dragons. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, create that many treasure tokens. You're seeing a theme here. There is a sub-treasure theme in this deck. The more treasure tokens I get out, the more dragons I get out. So those are important. Sarkhan, Soul of Flame. Dragon spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Whenever a dragon enters the battlefield under your control, you can have Sarkhan, Soul of Flame become a copy of it until the end of turn, except its name is Sarkhan and it's legendary in addition to its other types. Oh, I know you were looking at this. I know you saw it. A serialized Ramos. Love serialized cards. I've got 5 of them now. And this card is also super useful in this deck. Whenever you cast a spell, put a 1/1 counter on it, remove 5 1/1 counters from Ramos, and you add all this mana, which helps me get dragons out. Savage Ventmaw. Whenever Savage Ventmaw attacks, you add 3 red, 3 green to your mana pool till the end of turn. This mana doesn't empty from your mana pool as steps and phases end, and I actually use that in an unlimited or infinite combo in this deck. So I'm going to put this aside so I can show you that. Scourge of Valkis. Whenever this or another dragon enters the battlefield under your control, it deals X damage to target creature or player, where X is the number of dragons you control. Remember that, this is a neat little combo here. I like showing combos off because that's my favorite thing. Remember the ancient gold dragon, right? So you got the ancient gold dragon. Say you get it out. Say best case scenario, you roll a d20. You get 20 of these little fairy dragons. See how that works now? Whenever this enters the battlefield, it deals X damage to target creature, where X is the number of dragons you control. You can do somebody for 20 damage. So neat little combo there and great card. We have the Scale Lord Reckoner. All right, a nice white dragon flying. Whenever a dragon you control becomes a target spell ability an opponent controls, destroy target non-land permanent that player controls. Great way to protect your creatures. Shivan Devastator. Love this card from Dominaria United, flying at haste, and it enters the battlefield with X 1/1 counters on it. I put this in here because it's super low casting cost. Like I might be able to bring this out turn 2 just as a 1/1 if I need it for a blocker, and it helps keep the total mana value of the deck down so it moves a little faster. Skithiryx, the Blight Dragon. Love the printing of this card. It's got Infect. This creature deals damage to creatures in form of -1/1 counters and to players in the form of poison counters. And then Skithiryx, the Blight Dragon, you can gain haste to the end of turn if I tap 1 mana. If I tap 2 black mana, you regenerate it. Love this card, Great Black Dragon. Twin Flame Tyrant, beautiful special version of this card. Now, the Twin Flame Tyrant, I've got another version here. If a source you control would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals double that damage instead. So this came from Foundations. It's the Japanese print. I don't know what this is called, ultra foil or something like that, but I absolutely love that card. And it had to include just that was included based just a super useful card, right? You can double all your damage, but it's also a beautiful card, so it had to go in there. And sometimes I'll do that when I build decks. I'll put a card in a deck, not because it's great, but also because, and this card happens to be great, so don't get it twisted, but because it's a beautiful card and I want to include it. Like there's a place for a serialized in every single one of my decks. Tiamat, the Dragon God. When Tiamat enters the battlefield, if you cast it, search your library for up to 5 dragon cards not named Tiamat that each have different names, reveal them and put them into your hand, then shuffle. This could also be a dragon commander. Love this card from Adventures in Forgotten Realms. Advera Hellkite. Whenever a dragon you control attacks, put a 6/6 red dragon creature token with flying into the battlefield, and then Terror of the Peaks from the Outlaws of Thunder Junction. I loved that set. Spells your opponent's cast at target Terror of the Peaks cost an additional 3 life to cast, so it's hard to get rid of. And then whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Terror of the Peaks deals damage equal to that creature's power to any target. How many creatures do we have here? Actually, I can just look this up on my deck list. That's why I pulled it up. We have 30 total creatures, but we do have a lot of mana dorks in this deck. Like, let's count those up. We've got, I think I put 5. We got the Noble, which is 1. Ignoble, which is 2. Essica, which is 3. Dryad, I'll count that, which is 4. Delighted, which is 5. Bloom, which is 6. Birds of Paradise, which is 7. A lot of times when I build decks, especially kinfolk decks, I like to keep them pure. As many dragons as possible, but in a 5-color deck, you need things to fix your mana. And so they are an auto include. Any 5-color deck I build, you're going to see a Birds of Paradise. You're going to see a Bloom Tender. You're going to see an Ignoble. You're going to see a Noble. I can't get enough of those cards so I can get stuff out early and get it moving, because that's the one weakness of a 5-color deck. You could make the argument that my best deck is my mono blue Urza deck, moves at lightning speed because there's only 1 mana source. With 5, it gets tougher. So we've covered the creatures. We've covered the planeswalkers. Now let's talk about our artifacts. We have an Arcane Signet, some mana ramp. And this is great in a 5-color deck because you get 1 of any color in your commander's identity. Chromatic Lantern, we talked about that a little earlier. Lands you control have add 1 mana of any color, and it will add 1 mana of any color. This has got a casting cost of 3. In general, I think this card's a little overrated, if you will, if I dare say that, but not in a 5-color deck. In a 5 or a 4-color deck, this is stellar. I saved those for those. The Dragon Arch. Put a multicolored creature card from your hand into play. Super useful in the dragon card. There's a lot of multicolored dragons. The Dragon's Horde. Whenever a dragon enters the battlefield under your control, put a gold counter on it, remove a gold counter, and draw a card, and you can add 1 mana of any color. So again, some mana ramp. Felwar Stone. Again, maybe a little overrated in a single color deck, but in a 5-color deck, unreal. Add 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls could produce. Guaranteed in a 4-player game, I'm going to get something I need with that. The Grim Monolith. I've got a bunch of these just from, I used to collect years ago. And these are great cards. It does not untap during your untap phase, and you can add 3 colorless right away. So a great way to accelerate the game quickly. This had to go in this deck because I need some acceleration with the higher casting costs of the things. The Herald's Horn. Bring my creature costs down by 1. All right, so super important. That's the main ability of this card. All right. The Jeweled Lotus. The Jeweled Lotus adds 3 mana of any 1 color. Spend this mana only to cast your commander. Generally, I use these in monocolor decks or 2-color decks, but it had to go in here because it is useful to get my Dragon out. And if I can get that out quick, usually I do win the game. Lotus Petal. Sacrifice Lotus Petal. Add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Play this ability as a mana source. The Mana Crypt. Another great way to accelerate mana. Now, you might be asking, Bobby, this is the first time I've watched your videos. What are you doing? You're playing with banned cards. First of all, by the time you watch this video, hopefully these are unbanned. I have a very, very, very strong feeling the Jeweled Lotus is going to be unbanned. The Mana Crypt's going to be unbanned. The Dockside Extortionist is going to be unbanned. So I keep them in my deck. But remember, this deck is also about collectability, and I'm going to include the Mana Crypt in every deck that I can. It's worth too much, and I absolutely love the card. I'll never forget the joy of, the first box of Eternal Masters I bought when I actually pulled a foil Mana Crypt, and I was so excited. So yeah, this is going in my deck. And if I play against somebody that doesn't want to play with banned cards, and we just replace it with something, a good replacement for this, you could put in a Mox Amber. That actually didn't make the cut for my deck, but a Mox Amber I've got somewhere. I'm looking over here because I've got one around. That would be a great replacement for this card. Relic of Legends. Add 1 mana of any color and tap an untapped legendary creature you control. Add 1 mana of any color, more mana ramp. Soul Ring, more mana ramp, and the Urza's Incubator. Make my dragons cheaper to play. So a lot of recurring themes in here. Make dragons cheaper to play and a lot mana ramp. And let's talk mana ramp. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I would count this 8, 9, 10. So between that and the creatures, like I have enough mana in this deck to get the job done. And usually with 5-color decks, I play a lot more of those type of cards than a monocolor deck or a 2-color deck. Now we'll talk about enchantments. All right, sometimes I do instants and sorceries first, but I want to get to these. The Dragon Tempest had to include this. My last card in the deck, this was the last card I put in. It was between this and the Mox Amber, and I chose this because I figured I had a lot of mana ramp. And the truth is, I needed to save the Mox Amber for other decks. All my decks live and breathe and are in existence. If you come to my house, and I'm kind of looking at my Mox field now, but if you pull this deck up, it will match exactly what's on here. I don't shuttle cards between decks. And so I decided to save the Mox Amber for another deck and use this in here. And it's a dragon themed card. So I wanted to put it in. Maybe the Mox Amber would have been a better choice from a play standpoint, but I'm okay making the deck a little less competitive if it's about collectability. And by the way, this deck it's competitive. Like when I say it's not my most competitive deck, it's a pretty damn good deck. So let's not get that confused. Whenever a creature with flying enters the battlefield under your control, it gains haste until the end of turn. And whenever a dragon enters the battlefield under your control, it deals X damage to target creature or player, where X is the number of dragons you control. Again, with that ancient gold dragon, this is a great combo. Smothering Tithe, almost an auto include when you can have white in a deck. Whenever an opponent draws a card, that player pays 2. If the player doesn't, you create a treasure token. I didn't have to include this, but again, I wanted more of those treasure tokens. There's a sub-treasure theme. It allows me to get my bigger creatures out quicker. Mystic Remora, I call this the poor man's Rhystic Study. I only have a couple of Rhystic Studies. I don't have much of them. Like I have a ton of Demonic Tutors. I have a ton of Grim Monoliths. I have a ton of Yawgmoth's Wills. I think I have 11 Yawgmoth's Wills. I'd have to check my list, but like Rhystic Study, I just don't have a lot of them. So if I don't have a Rhystic Study, this is what goes in the deck. It's got a cumulative upkeep, which is a bit of a pain. But if I have all those treasure tokens, it's no problem. And whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, you may draw a card unless that player pays 4. Land Tax, super underrated. Love this card. Beginning your upkeep, if an opponent controls more lands than you, you can search your library for up to 3 basic lands, reveal them, and put them into your hand and shuffle. Super useful in a 4-player game. Sneak Attack, a way for me to get creatures on the battlefield faster. Whenever I have a deck with big, beefy creatures and I have red, I use that. Now, Aggravated Assault. Here is that combo I alluded to earlier with the Savage Ventmaw, all right? This is something I just figured out. The beauty of Commander is I've only been playing Commander for 2 years. I used to play a lot of 60-card decks. And again, I had all those complete sets. Playing Commander has opened my eyes to all kinds of new stuff, and this is one of the newer combos I discovered, right? Aggravated Assault, you pay 5, you pay 3 colorless and 2 red, and you untap all creatures you control. If there's a main phase, there's an additional combat phase followed by an additional main phase. Activate only as a sorcery. Well, every time this guy attacks, you add 6 to your mana pool. You can create unlimited attacks with this, provided this does not die. You can create unlimited attacks with the dragon deck. If I have a bunch of big dragons on the field, this is one of my win conditions. This is a game ender right here. So wanted to share that with you. If you are playing a dragon deck, I would include this 100 times out of 100. Now for the instance, all right, lightning bolt, super useful. Dark Ritual, super useful. Again, these are really inexpensive cards to buy, but they are super useful in a game of Commander. This one for getting rid of people's creatures or their planeswalkers, or you might be able to win the game. I've seen people win the game on this. This is Mana Ramp. Counterspell, the classic, and you know it's old because it says Interrupt. This one's from Ice Age. One of the first sets I bought, I got in during Unlimited. And then it was revised, and then it was 4th edition, and then Ice Age. And so I've got one of my old Ice Age cards in here. I use them when I can. Counterspell. Path to Exile, great removal spell. Swords to Plowshares, great removal spell. Show and Tell. Each player may put an artifact, creature, enchantment, or land card from his hand onto the battlefield. This gets dangerous. I wouldn't even play this. If I was playing against an Eldrazi deck, no way I'm playing this card. But I can choose to keep it in my hand or use it as a throwaway, right? But if I'm playing somebody who I know has smaller creatures and I've got the dragons, I'm putting this out all day. 3 steps behind. It's got that spree ability, but great to use as a counterspell. An offer you can't refuse. One of the better counterspells, and this card is really cheap right now. I want to check up the value of this. I think you can get this for under $1. It's $1.29, this version, and this version is from Foundations, but you can use this turn 1, and all the other player gets is a couple of treasure tokens. Demonic Tutor, old school tutor. And I like this card, the Demonic Tutor here. This is an old school one. I think this is revised. I was just looking it up to see if I could see the printing on my Mox field. Sometimes I get revised and Unlimited confused, but I'm pretty sure this is revised. But anyway, I can get any card from my graveyard, put it into my hand. Or not my graveyard, what am I saying? Not my graveyard. I can get a card from my library and put it into my hand. Vampiric Tutor. Search your library for a card, then shuffle your library and put that card on top of it. You lose 2 life. Another great tutor. Worldly Tutor. A way for me to get a creature from my library, useful in the dragon deck. Noxious Revival. This is what I was trying to talk about when I was talking about the Demonic Tutor. This allows me to get a target card from a graveyard and put it on top of its owner's library. So this allows me to fish a creature from my graveyard. Assassin's Trophy, a great 2-color removal spell. Love this card. And then an old school Mana Drain. This one goes for $187.46, according to TCG Player. Love this old school card. Again, it says Interrupt. So those are my instants and sorceries. All right. And now for the lands. And lands are a big part of a deck. You know, if you're building a single or 2-color deck, you can go with a lot of basics, but this one is all special lands. Yavimaya, Crater of Growth, turns all my lands into forests, necessary in a 4 or 5-color deck that has green in it. In any 5-color deck, I'll put that in an Urborg, just so you know. Blooming Marsh, 2-color mana source. Botanical Sanctum, 2-color mana source. Spectator Seeding, 2-color mana source. Not the greatest 2-color mana sources. The best are dual lands, but chances are I've got a bunch of dual lands in here. I save my dual lands for my 5-color decks. Minas Morgul, Cabal Coffers. Add a black mana for each swamp you control. I'm going to put that aside because that's important. Training Center. Pillar of the Prunes. Add 1 mana of any color. Spend this mana only to cast a multicolored spell. I got a lot of multicolored spells in here, so away we go. Caves of Kolos. Compulsion Forest. And you'll see I have a bunch of dual type lands in here to help with mana fixing. Crucible of the Spirit Dragon. Love this card. For this deck especially, add 1 to your mana pool. Put a storage counter on Crucible of the Spirit Dragon and remove X storage counters for Crucible of the Spirit Dragon. Add X in any combination of colors to your mana pool. Spend this mana ability only to cast dragon spells or abilities of dragons. So not useful in another deck, but a dragon deck, it's great. Sulphur Springs, Outercore Wastes. These dual lands, I've got a bunch of these in here so I can decide what I need when I pull them. I call them duals, they're not true duals. I think they're called flip lands. Clearwater Pathway, Darkmoor Pathway, Shivan Reef, Ancient Tomb, a way to get some mana ramp. Now, here's our first true duel, Savannah. All right, Yavimaya Coast, Brushland. Here's another duel, a Bayou. Here's another duel, Tropical Island. Another duel, Scrubland, Bobby Maximus. What is going on with all these true duels? Plateau, Taiga, Urborg, the Tomb of Yawgmoth. And this is what I wanted to talk to you about. I never used to do this, but then I figured it out, and now I do. Each land is a swamp in addition to its other land types, and add a black mana for each swamp you control. Super powerful if I have a bunch of lands out. So anytime you have an Urborg, make sure you have a Cabal Coffers in your deck. Haven of the Spare Dragon. Add 1 to your mana pool. Add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool to cast a dragon creature spell. And then if you sacrifice it, you can return a target dragon or Ugin Planeswalker card from your graveyard to your hand. So super useful if you are playing dragons. Command Tower, the ultimate land in a 5-color commander deck. And it's funny because this card here, Taiga, I think those go for about $300 lately. But this is a $300 card. This you probably get for like 25 cents. This is a better card in this deck, which is unreal. It's just been printed en masse, and these are really hard to find. And then the reserve list. So just a funny little point about Magic, right? It's not always the cost of the card that determines how good it is. Cavern of Souls. All right. Super useful in a kinfolk deck. So it went in the dragon deck. These tri-lands from the Streets of New Capenna were absolutely stellar. Plaza of Heroes, another underrated land, but useful in a 5-color deck, and especially if you are using a lot of legendary spells. There's a lot of legendary dragons. So you can add a colorless, or you can add 1 mana of any color, spend this to cast a legendary spell, add 1 mana of any color among legendary permanents you control, and you can exile it, and your legendary creature gets hexproof and indestructible to the end of turn. So love this. This goes in my Assassins deck too, like the Dragons. There's actually a lot of similarities between how I built my Assassins deck and my Dragon deck. Both had 5 colors, both had a lot of legendary creatures, both needed a lot of mana fixing, both needed this land. Another one of those tri-lands, another one of those dual type lands, the Underground River. And then we have more true duels, Badlands and Volcanic Islands. Look at this. Ooh, it is just like dual land central right here. Look at that. Just beautiful. One of the reasons this deck is worth $5,500, but I save these. I have a bunch of dual lands. I have about 50 of them, and I use them mostly in my 5-color decks to help with mana fixing. That is my dragon deck. But before I started, and this video is going to go over overtime a little bit, I wanted to show you some of the cards that didn't quite make the cut. Sarkhan Ball, I already had the Sarkhan Planeswalker, and I thought it was a lot better than this. Truth be told, this isn't the strongest Planeswalker. Savitri Dragon Master, another decent Planeswalker, but not the most powerful. Nicol Bolas God Pharaoh, Nicol Bolas Planeswalker, incredibly powerful cards, but with high casting costs. I've already got high casting costs for a lot of my dragons and my Dragon, so I couldn't include them, but I'd like to build a deck with these in it. Tarkir World Render, the 2-headed Hellkite, the Dragon Broodmother, the Inferno of Star Mounts, Rith, Liberated Primeval, Dragonlord Atarka, Dragonlord Simulger, Nicol Bolas, the Dragon God, Ebondeath Dracolich. I think this dragon is one of the better ones. And the Ancient Bronze Dragon, a way to put a bunch of 1/1 counters on all your creatures. Like, these are all incredible dragons. It would be fine choices for a dragon deck. I was just really trying to fine tune these, and I didn't choose these dragons. And I love dragons. This is a real struggle for me to not include these cards. So you know I will be building more dragon decks. And once this Dragonstorm set comes out, I will have the cards and the horsepower to do it. So you know, you might see now that I think about it, you might see 3 dragon decks from me. Like I told you, Vampires, Dragons, my favorite. I'd want all the decks. If I had an ultimate dream in Magic, I would build like 300 commander decks. My short-term goal is 100. I want to have 100 dedicated, awesome decks. So this is my dragon deck. Thank you for spending some time with me today. All the notes on these cards, they're in the show notes and a bunch of other fun stuff. So thank you for spending a little bit of your day with me and allowing me to share one of my biggest passions with you.